Welcome to the CDI CTO Podcast, presented by CDI Studios.
Hey everybody, how you doing? And welcome to the CDI CTO Podcast. I'm Will Huber, the CTO at CDI. And today we thought it would be cool we're going to do actually 2 episodes of this where we introduce the various members of CDI's Office of the CTO. So as we've grown as a company, what we found is that we needed to find a way to really scale the CTO function. And if you're familiar with our go-to-market pillars framework, where we have the various different pillars of our organization, they are hybrid cloud, security, modern applications, intelligent operations, digital workflow, and digital workspace. What we've done is we've aligned our Office of the CTO to have what we call divisional CTOs or solution CTOs that are specifically focused on each of those individual pillars of the framework. So with me today, I have 3 of the members of the Office of the CTO. What we're going to do is really just spend some time getting to know them, and we'll have a conversation, amongst each other. I've got some questions to sort of moderate things and keep the conversation flowing, and we'll go from there. So Chris, why don't you start? We'll go from you all the way down, and if you want to just introduce yourself, what section of the portfolio it is that you look after. Actually, you're kind of a unique story.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't really have a pillar, do I?
We start with the outlier.
Right. Start with the outlier.
You have all of them, right? So explain what it is that you do, and just a little bit about your background and what you're focused on.
Yeah, so obviously my name is Chris Black, and I am the Office of the CTO Divisional CTO member for Modern IT Ops, which is our managed services division, which handles everything from a day 2 through sunsetting of operations of IT. So when you look at each of the different pillars, there is the design, the implementation, the operational side of it. And my job is to look after the operational side.
Cool. Felix?
Yeah, so Felix Vargas, I'm the CTO focused on security. I'm responsible for the go-to-market strategy as well as the services catalog for our security business. Most of the time it involves tools and deploying tools, managing tools over time. There are also services that we provide that are agnostic in nature that help organizations set their cybersecurity strategy. And I'm also working on neat things like integrating tools to achieve meaningful outcomes, things that tools where we have capabilities and our customers are looking to achieve those outcomes and we can facilitate that.
Cool. So modern IT ops, security, and
intelligent operations. Cool. And I'm Brian Kennedy. So the way I kind of like to introduce the intelligent operations pillar or focus area is really the types of information, insights that an SRE or a NOC analyst would need in order to kind of really do their job, realize that something's wrong, conduct an investigation, remediate, et cetera. That's really what's in my portfolio of solutions that I look after here. And then I guess maybe one last part of it is really kind of more what an executive would need in terms of governance of platforms. So I spend a lot of time looking at things like cloud management, FinOps, a lot of configuration management, CMDB type issues as well.
Cool. So one of the things I like to talk about with various guests, and we've had partner guests, and hopefully someday we'll have customer guests and other employees at CDI. I think there's a lot of learnings in everyone's story in terms of like where they came from, how they got into technology, and how they got to where they are today. So obviously you guys didn't start as CTOs. So I'm curious for each of you, if you could maybe spend a couple minutes just talking about like what was it that made you want to get into IT? Were you always in IT, or did you sort of start in another career, have another career, and then bridged into IT? Tell us about where you came from, maybe about I think you're all from acquired companies, right? So Yep. Maybe talk about that a little bit. But Felix, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so my story is interesting. I started in IT modding Xboxes. We had this concept of, and I don't think I've told you guys this, but what the Xbox is today, as far as going into it and playing movies, is what we were striving for. There was a product called XBMC, and that's what everyone wanted, was to burn their own. Right, so again, we're not violating any copyrights.
I was going to say, are you pirating?
No, we're not pirating anything. But the DVDs that you own, burn them into your own Xbox and play them. Right. So I would literally walk around with an Xbox, my wife and I, on a date night to somebody else's house, and we would have a library of 100 movies that we have collected over time. So that involved deploying a mod chip on these devices, and it was a black box to me, and the mod chip had to align with the motherboard. There were certain points that had to align, and that was tightened by a screw, and it kept on coming loose. So the guy that set this up for me, it wasn't me initially. I kept on bringing my Xbox to him, and then I realized, I'm like, this, all he's doing is tying a screw, and I can solder this, right? So I just soldered the mod chip to the motherboard, and all those problems went away. And then that's when I really learned that IT is all about following instruction of things that, you know, other folks develop. Like if you think about what's in a data center, the folks that are managing it, none of them created it, right? This was created by, you know, a vendor, and they provide documentation, and you read documentation and you try to sort of, you know, execute on that. And so that's what, you know, where I started. And then from there, I started my own business, focusing on small businesses and helping them adopt cloud solutions, whether it be Google, email, or, voice as a service, you name it. And then from there, I progressed to ClearPath, which was, eventually became the company that was acquired by CDI. Yep. But yeah, so I had a stint at VMware as well, where, I was there for 3.5 years, primarily focused on, I wore many hats there, but I left there as a staff SE, a global staff SE, and then I joined ClearPath again as the CTO there.
Very cool. Yeah. Hopefully nobody from Microsoft. Microsoft is a partner of ours. Hopefully they're not watching. Voiding your Xbox warranty.
What triggered you to get into a more security focused off of that?
So that's an interesting story. So I was at ClearPath, and I went to VMware for 3.5 years. And at VMware, I was selling NSX and helping customers adopt that platform. When I went back to ClearPath, my focus was to build a Kubernetes practice, as well as an automation practice. That's primarily what I was focused on. I mean, I had been, involved in selling and helping customers deploy security solutions, but I wasn't focused solely in security. And it wasn't until one of our largest customers at ClearPath went down due to a ransomware event. And they had about $1.5 million of product on the shelf that, I took it personal. I took it personal because we were responsible at ClearPath for facilitating that transaction, and it became personal. And then from that moment forward, that's all I've been doing. So it's a passion for me to prevent those sorts of events from happening.
Cool. Brian, what's your story? How'd you get into IT? Right, you were business owner, founder, right?
Yeah.
How'd you get
way
there?
Before that, I was always just really intrigued by computers and playing games, starting out playing games and doing sort of the most simplistic things with computers. But I tell you, from the very beginning, I was pretty frustrated by hardware. I couldn't stand, still some of the guys on the team that I work with. Was us in high school. Literally going to computer shows, buying different parts, trying to put things together, our own networks. And
there's nothing wrong with that.
I hated all of
that's what we used to do.
It was so frustrating, but I wanted it to work. And but most people that I meet recently and sort of understand the things I'm focused on now don't understand that I actually started much more as a programmer. Yep. I wrote code. When I first came out of school, I was writing C++ and Perl, primarily, lots and lots of lines of code. It was sort of early in the web, kind of .com days. I was working for a company that had a great opportunity to build an e-commerce platform that, if that business had been able to pivot, right, if they did all the things that, let's say we preach today in DevOps practices and the ability to be more agile and nimble and introduce change, if that company had been able to really pivot the business model to lean more into e-commerce, I think that company could have been what we all know as Amazon today, what Amazon has become. So we were really kind of pushing the boundaries in terms of the web, and we had to get data out of closed systems, mainframes, a Stratus kind of focused on ordering, high transaction volume orders, things like that. So, we had to, it was the early stages of what, later was ETL tools and all these asynchronous messaging tools that came out. And then I really just started focusing. Once we kind of figured out those problems of how to get to the data and do the integrations, I became much more focused on sort of the user experience, create great, experiences for users that we would expect today, kind of on a mobile phone, like a fast, everything works. Became very focused on sort of front-end web technology. From there, I kind of realized, this stuff's got to scale. I mean, there was no Amazon, there was no auto scaling groups, right? We had to figure out like, how can we handle swells? How do we handle the spikes in volume, things like that. So I became sort of very back into the infrastructure world. I remember sort of getting the first Cisco load balancer. It wasn't even called a load balancer at the time, but like that device that's going to sort of spread traffic across all these things and trying to figure it out in the data center. So I became much more infrastructure focused for a while. And then I'd say sort of the last part of the journey, which really kind of got me to where I am today, was like, okay, cool. We have all this stuff set up. There's really complicated software. There's really complicated infrastructure. But inevitably, things are going to break. We got to keep this stuff running. And like at the time, if I go back into kind of early 2000s, I mean, there really was a wall between sort of the developers or the engineers of things and the operations people. So once I started focusing on that operations sort of problem and empowering people to keep things up and sort of, just sort of almost get to like what we talk about, a zero touch type of an operations model, I realized like this would potentially be the rest of my career. I'm going to focus here.
I think your development background is serving you well now, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
This modern space, like think about SRE, right? What is SRE? Like I like to describe it as what happens when a software engineer builds an operations team, right? At the end of the day, right? You need to understand software engineering to do that.
Software engineers tend to not like to be woken up on the weekend or at 3:00 in the morning for a crisis, type of call. So I think people who start out in that world tend to approach the operations problem with like, this should be zero touch. Like it should just sort of self-heal, and I don't want to be woken up. It should just run all the time. Let's do the right things we have to do. Worst case, if we do find ourselves in a war room, if we're in some kind of a firefight, let's make sure we have all the right information at our disposal to restore operations quickly.
Cool. So Brian, you, and folks watching don't know this, but you're a tinkerer, right? I've worked with you in the lab quite a bit, and you love to go into different areas, and you have a strong curiosity. How would you say, like, how important is the fact that you're a very curious person and you love to tinker in your career?
Well, I think, I say this in recruiting and interviewing all the time. It's the number one thing that I look for in somebody to join, our team is to have what I call technical curiosity and really want to know how things work. And even if it's not your space, like you and I were working on some Zscaler stuff recently. Zscaler, very networking centric, not really my space, right? But as we're putting together a demo in the lab, like I really want to understand, well, wait a minute, why is this happening? Why is that happening? Not because I want to be able to do it over and over again. I want to understand it so that downstream, as we're building out some extra piece of it, it all kind of comes together.
Right. I think we've all kind of gotten to the point in our careers as we've grown, right? We understand that there's 457 different ways to do the same thing in IT. None of them are right, none of them are wrong. They're just different ways of attacking the same problem. And understanding the different options that are available to us allows us to make better choices for scalability, sustainability, growth within what we're trying to accomplish. And I think, to your point, though, being a tinkerer helps.
The funny thing is that Brian and I'm the type of person, I have a lab, and I love to sort of tinker as well. And I love to have these sessions where we're getting super technical. So Brian and I, it's like 6 p.m. on a Friday, and we're on the command line. And I'm watching Brian, and I'm thinking, all right, well, this guy, he's pretty smart. Then I take over, and I'm, on the command line, and we're just collaborating. I thought it was so cool. And I'm like, you know what? You're definitely a tinkerer, and we align.
We're
right?
not just empty suits here in the office.
No.
We're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, we are.
Chris, what about your story? How'd you get into technology?
So I was programming at a very young age, early 80s. So you can figure out what age that was.
COBOL, basic?
Basic, just back in the Apple days. And then I got into sports and realized there were girls in the world and kind of got away from IT for a while. Went off to college. College wasn't really for me. Dropped out, went into the Army, Signal Corps, came out of the Army, went back to college, figured it was for me. Second time I figured it wasn't for me again, dropped out the second time. Took the first IT job I could get. I was lucky enough to work for a parent company that had 5 subsidiaries underneath of it. So even my first job in IT was a managed services type provider of an organization. and you understand the different intricacies between working for a parent organization that's providing multi-tenancy solutions for different organizations, even if they're in the same company. CIO at the time was kind enough to let me basically take day classes and any kind of school I wanted to go to. And then I would just come into the office at night, close out my tickets, do all my work, set up the networking stuff. From there, I went to go work for a data center company based out of the Lehigh Valley. Grew that data center from about 12,000, 15,000 square feet to just about 500,000 square foot worth of raised floor data center space, high-speed dense weighted division multiplexing networks, built out the whole managed services practice, built out the NOC, did all the operational things. And at that time, we kind of looked at the state of the landscape of IT and said, organizations are outsourcing the big boxes. Yep. Like, I don't need the data center anymore. They're going to start outsourcing the little boxes. They're going to start working with partners to manage those smaller components. So I left there. I went to go work for another company for about a year, just managing a team of 2,200 people, which is a lot to deal with. Then we started a company called HA Services. And HA Services was a 100% managed services organization. So we rented co-location space from Equinix and from TierPoint and built out our own IaaS multi-cloud infrastructure, tied it in, did all the daily operations, backups, DR, patching, everything that goes into running IT from a day-to-day perspective. December of 2020, CDI came knocking and acquired High Availability, merged everything in, came over as part of the OCTO team to look at operations and how do we drive efficiencies across it.
Very cool. Awesome. So there's a lot of wisdom here, right? We're all sort of well into our careers, right? And I often think about...
I'm not quite sure how to take that.
It's funny.
I think I'm just getting started. Like, I got some tread left on these tires.
Yeah, there you go. That's good. We hope you do. What would you tell a young person today, or maybe not a young person, maybe somebody who's looking to get into the technology space, whether they're just in high school or college or much later in life looking to make a career change? What would your advice be to them? What would you study? What would you study? What discipline would you recommend? Would you recommend a college path or certifications? Maybe that would be good things to go after. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so for me, it's interesting. My nephew is about to graduate high school. So, I'm his godfather and, I think the world of the kid, and he comes to me for advice. What should I do? And his parents want him to go to school, which makes sense. He wants to play pro soccer, but that's not in the cards for him. And so, I'm biased. I'm in cybersecurity. There are 769,000 unfilled cybersecurity roles today. That industry is skyrocketing. And so my recommendation to him was go to school for the experience. I don't necessarily think that you have to go to a 4-year institution to be successful or happy in life. Sure. It does provide some, clearly, right?
Well, it opens up doors that took me longer to get through.
Sure.
Right. Because you do that, right?
Right.
It's just a fact.
Right. And so, what I've told him is I've started him down the, when you're at home and you have free time, invest in yourself and do not limit yourself. Number one, right? He's going through his A+ certification right now. Trying to understand IT.
That's the first certification.
That's the face. That's the first certification.
Everyone's got to get that first. You check that off.
And I tell them, listen, go through this, sir. You're probably not going to understand everything. Certifications don't make people, but it does sort of expand your mind into what is possible, and then take risks, right? So while you're going down the school path, work on the trade. And I often hear, like, if you go on Facebook, there's a trend where they say plumbers and electricians, these trades are important. I consider IT a trade. Right, and it's not often talked about, whether it's cybersecurity or otherwise. It's a trade. You can get certs, you can learn, and there's a non-traditional path that doesn't involve a 4-year education. That's not to say stay in school, everyone. Don't go in school, but we have so many options now, right, that don't necessarily involve just going to a 4-year institution.
I think the traditional higher education sort of model still works for a lot of people, and,
Sure.
It's great. But I also think it's great that we've come to the conclusion, certainly within our business at CDI, and I sense this sort of more holistically in the industry, that it's not required. Right? That's one path to get here.
Recent trends.
It's not required.
Right.
Now, I actually feel like at this stage of my life, I've answered this question pretty regularly, just between like my family members and sort of, children of my friends. Like this question actually comes up more like to the point where I feel like I have it somewhat scripted. And I tell people, I say, I don't underestimate programming. You started in programming. I started in programming. Like we all constantly are dealing with everything being codified. I mean, infrastructure as code is all the automation that we want to kick in. Like, I think it's important to learn to write code. I'm not going to tell you which language to write. Like, just learn the concepts, learn the principles. I think that's really important. I think networking is really, really important. Understand kind of intercommunication. We know things are being kind of more and more distributed, right? Everything's got to talk to everything. And it's relying on a bunch of networking principles that have been around for a long time. I think it's really important to understand those kind of at fundamental levels. And then last but not least, here I am saying I have it all rehearsed. I have a third one. I'm blanking on my third one.
I'll jump in because I'll take it in a completely different direction, because I get asked this question quite a bit as well.
Sure.
And while the technical traits matter, right? I tell everybody, pick up a finance book, understand the language of business.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
At the end of the day,
You're right.
whether it's a profit and nonprofit, it doesn't matter. The language of business is finance, and you have to understand what those terms mean, even at a 30,000 foot view, right? And get to know the business.
Yep.
So therefore, when you're making IT decisions, it's driving the business forward. This whole concept of aligning IT and the business together, right? To me is a farce. I've never heard of sales needing to align to the business or marketing needing to align to the business. You're a part of the business. Right. Let's act like it.
Right.
And you have to understand what the business is trying to accomplish so you can drive IT to enact organizational change so you can drive everything forward.
Right. Just one comment. You said something that resonated around coding, and both of you started there.
I was not a very good coder.
You were not very good.
My brain is not wired that way, but I did try.
Neither was I. But I will say that if you do, I went to a 4-year institution and I did take C++. That was the first programming class that I took. And I'll never forget the assignment our teacher had where it was write a program where you input it a year and it'll tell you if it's a leap year or not. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's after going through 3 chapters. And my code was about 30 lines. Right, my program was about 30 lines. Hers was 3, right? And so I had to sort of, and that's when I first learned. It's like we can all get to that answer, but we're not doing it in the most efficient way, and that sort of trains your mind. So you don't. And my point is, you don't necessarily have to be a coder, but you have to understand the concepts around coding, and that sort of helps shape your mind from an IT perspective.
I don't even know if computer science programs are starting with something like C++ anymore. Right. I suspect they're not, but if
I suspect a lot of them are.
Yeah, they still are. So it's I've always said to even not long after I graduated school and sort of talking to people who were still in school and struggling through their first set of classes, it's like, and the same thing happens in like pre-med, right? Like I'm going to be pre-med, and you land in your first biology class, college level biology class, and it's like it's essentially a weeding out process.
Right.
Like I think you learn the intricacies of C++. It's like it's not really this complicated in the real world, right? Like it actually gets easier, but it's important to like learn that
the basics down,
principles.
Just at least the basics.
I take a slightly different approach here too. I tell people all the time. Like all the things you said is certainly relevant, but you really have to find the thing that you really love. Like, I don't care what it is, whether it's if you like computers or you like programming or you like security or whatever it is, find what you're passionate about and just lean into that. Like that was always good advice that I got, because at the end of the day, like you're going to be working, you're going to have a career for a long time, right? Hopefully. And you can't really be great at something you hate. Right. With there's certainly exceptions to that, probably. But I think if you like what you're doing and you're really passionate about it and you can get behind it and lean into it, I think that makes everybody better at what they do.
I couldn't agree more. And part of the challenge with that is that we have to have a certain level of curiosity in order to find potentially what we're passionate about. Yeah. Again, these young folks growing up, they may not know what they're passionate about. Yep. but you need to expose yourself to different disciplines, whether it's finance, IT, you name it, security, in order to find.
You recently found your passion.
I recently
like
found my passion, right?
And what's interesting though is, sometimes focus drives passion.
Yep.
Right? So if you try something, you find out you like it. You try something else, you find out you don't like it. And I'm going to go back to what I was passionate about. Like I'm going to go focus in on that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. So all three of you, we've already sort of touched on it, were members of acquired companies, right? So you were all acquired by CDI. A couple of you were, you mentioned you were founder. You were a founder of a business. You were an executive at an acquired company. What would you say to people going through, there's a lot of M&A happening right now, right? As an acquirer, and actually I'm not sure, well, you haven't yet been a part of on the acquirer side, right? Mm-hmm. Probably sometime you will be.
Get ready for late nights then.
So whether you're an acquirer or an
company,
acquiree,
valuations start coming to a more realistic.
We'll start seeing more of that.
What was that experience like, first of all, for each of you? I'm sure it's been a little different based on your role and sort of where you landed and all that kind of stuff. What advice would you give to people going through M&A? Because there's a lot of it happening right now.
I don't mind starting here since I was the sole founder of my firm, Kintyre. We were acquired by CDI in February of 20, so coming up on 2 years here, pretty quick. It was quite a learning experience for me. I think I had been approached. Kintyre was a very boutique. We were very focused, very specialized around what we did. We're well known kind of in the ecosystem as being very good at what we did, but we weren't very broad. And I think our boutique-ness sort of attracted a lot of potential acquirers. I got a lot of inquiries about, would I be willing to come kind of join forces with a much broader platform firm like CDI. And most of the time I just sort of entertained the conversation. I wasn't thinking that it would ever really go anywhere. COVID made me kind of rethink some things about, sort of being an entrepreneur and like the type of risk that I was willing to sort of see through for my staff and my people. And it kind of caused me to rethink. And so if someone else was going through this and thinking about potentially, being acquired as a strategic thing, right? There's a reason behind that. Like, what are you really looking for out of it? It's almost like start with the end in mind before you kind of get into the discussions. And so I spent a lot of time, and we all had a lot of time in COVID sort of thinking about this, like, what do I really want? Like why I could just sort of sell to the highest bidder and like just give a bunch of contracts to my lawyer and tell me which one's the most lucrative in a sense, right? But I was much more about, where did I want to go and why was I doing this? Why was this good for my people? Why my staff, is what I mean by that. Why was this good for the partners that I was working with for so long? Why was this good for our customers? So, you got to have that sort of real driving reason in mind as you're entering into these discussions. The other thing I'd say is be prepared for some bobs and weaves, in the first year, 2 years. Like it's once you sort of get into the intricacies of integrating companies and operations, there's a lot of zigs and zags that you have to make, and just be prepared for that.
Cool. How about you guys?
Get ready to give up at least 45 nights in a row. We closed the CDI acquisition of High Availability on Christmas Eve of 2020.
We tend to like to do these things.
Yeah, what is up with the Christmas Eve thing, right? And there's the 45-day quiet period, and you're still running your business. You're still driving value to your clients. You still have a day job,
sure,
which means all of those meetings start at 8 p.m. and end at 2 a.m. So it was every night you were on the phone, every night you had another WebEx meeting, reviewing some document that you have never seen before.
Yep.
You're like, oh, I wonder what that means. And, back and forth. And we found that the old saying was correct. There was about 3 times we wanted to just walk away because the process is so onerous to get through. But it's been good. It's opened up a world of opportunities for the employees of HA at the time. There are now many more paths that they can take in their career. They can focus in on the security. They can do the DevOps. They can do the operation. They can do the SA side, right? There's a lot of things that are now available to them that weren't available before, which is great because that's what you want to do. You want to provide opportunity and give people the runway to excel.
Cool. How about you, Felix?
Funny thing is that December 2nd of 2021 is the first time I met you. And all the partners at ClearPath, were introduced to the CDI leadership, and we went through all the stuff. And what was interesting to me was when you all were done sort of giving or the pillars pitch and the value, I really wanted to be acquired. And there was one reason, right? The why behind this from my perspective is our customers. A lot of the things that we were able to do for our customers were limited by our own capabilities, right? So when I saw all the different, sort of experience, with different vendor products that ClearPath wasn't exposed to, I saw that as an opportunity to continue to help our customers further, right? And one of those things was security, right? We had a security practice, so did you, but a lot of, what is security? At the end of the day, is integrating these solutions to, enable business resilience, right? And there was a lot of tools in the market, and we did not have the capabilities across all these various tools that are so important. Splunk, ServiceNow, the list goes on, right? So that's how, I looked at it initially, right? And the why behind it and why, I was completely on board. And obviously the cloud native stuff as well. The process though is difficult. Right.
And it's supposed to be.
Yeah. The process is difficult. And, you stuck to the holiday theme because it closed, New Year's Eve. And but the process is difficult because there's a lot of change. Right. Sure. And not everyone is used to that level of change. And it's something that, I wasn't, right?
Which is interesting because IT implements more change on the organization than almost any other department within the org.
Yep. Right.
And yet when the change is implemented on us, we panic. We're like, what are we doing? I can't have change. This is not what we used to do.
Change, yeah.
So I just found that completely ironic.
Right. And people, don't like change, right? Yeah. Whether the end result may be good. And I could say probably across the board, I think most of the ClearPath folks that came on board are in very favorable positions, right? If not all, right? And so, but that process to sort of see that light was definitely, it takes an emotional toll.
I mean, what I love about it is, what I've learned too, right? Because before we did any of this, like I had never been through it myself either, right? Either on either side, and you learn to what I like most about it is it's actually very humbling, right? Because in every single example of every acquired company that we've bought, and there's been, 6 now in the last 2.5 years, there's been things about those companies that, like, maybe they did better than we were doing, right? So, like, I think about the managed services stuff, like down to the tools and some of the process. Like, we've adopted those models,
but
right?
To your point, though, it's being smart enough to look out over the landscape and say, okay, we're going to take the best of this, the best of this, the best of this, and fill it into a roadmap that has been well defined, with the whole strategy around the pillars. And these are the areas that there are gaps in the portfolio. So it's not just acquisitions for acquisition's sake.
Sure.
But it's saying, hey, we know we have these shortcomings, and oh, look, there's Kintyre. They're a great company. They fill this need. And if you look at the office of the CTO, there are members from every acquired company on it.
I love that.
Which is so fantastic,
good.
Right?
So good.
And we challenge each other. And Brian and I were having a discussion the other day about some operational stuff. And we're going back and forth. But that's excellent. Like, you want that. You want to challenge each other and get the best solutions.
It definitely is. It's elevating, right? It makes us all better. At a company level, at an individual level, at a team level, like it's really been great, I think.
Right, and for me, just recently, I worked with Brian, some of the ServiceNow folks, some of the networking and security folks, to sort of integrate various tools to achieve an outcome, and that was so satisfying, right? To sit there and say, well, I don't know much about Splunk, but this guy's an expert, right? And I can learn from him, right?
You can lean on him.
I can lean on him to drive a piece of this solution that I know nothing about, and I can learn from him as part of the process. There's, Tom O'Neill with ServiceNow, I can learn from him. There's Chris Whitten with Zscaler, I can learn from him, and then we can all sort of drive, this solution that is transformational to our customers, right? So you can't achieve that when you're at the size of a ClearPath, how important,
And it's always symbiotic. It's like, it's the same for us, right? Like, okay, so we were very heavily focused in Splunk. Did almost any technology you guys could name, right? I'm sure that our engineers at Kintyre integrated into a Splunk platform at one point or another. But then it's like, well, okay, that doesn't really get anybody anything. So I've got all this sort of telemetry coming into this really robust system for analytics. But like, what's the insights? What's this going to actually tell me? And we get drug into these conversations like, hey, I want to build an alert that tells me when X, right? And like you could describe that in plain English. Right. Okay, now go into Zscaler's logs and try to figure out how to systematically, identify exactly when that thing that was described in plain English. Yeah. We didn't know how to do that. Right. We weren't Zscaler experts. We're not even proxy on the internet, kind of experts. I mean, we recognize generally, this is where they started, this is where they went. But there's so much more information in there that we didn't understand. Right. So now at CDI, to be able to turn in each of those situations to an expert in another technology and say, hey, I need to tag you in here and help me out with this particular situation.
Back in the day when we all started in IT, we could know a lot about every different technology out there because there was only a handful of them, right? Like it's proliferated to the point where no one person
It's getting harder to know everything.
And it's getting harder and harder to know. And you got to admit your ignorance and be like, I don't know that. That's what we got these guys for. Like, go.
It's pretty darn important to be humble. I think that's the term you use. It's pretty important to be humble in this industry at this point.
Right. 100%. And you bring up a good point. Our customers are struggling with that same thing. When I look at the pillars, I think of silos, right? Yeah. You're the leader of a silo potentially at one of our customers. I'm the leader of a silo. You're a leader of a silo, right? And in some organizations, they don't work well together, right? And so that's what the difference is that we're sitting here at that level figuring this out, and it takes us a while to solve a problem because there are so many different moving pieces.
I never describe the pillars slide of CDI, which so many of us use for so many reasons in discussions. I never describe that without saying so you could see how I, in intelligent operations, would very much be constantly working with Felix in security, because anytime there's a security operations kind of conversation, we're collaborating. Or if I'm talking about Russell's area in modern applications, I like to say he's the dev to my ops and I'm the ops to his dev. Right? It's kind of that's how we work together, right? It's part of the value we provide and part of what makes it great to be here.
Cool. All right, one more question I have. What is the most rewarding thing about your job? Who wants to take that one?
I think I can. It's just a continuation of what we were just talking about, right? Like, I get to interact with so many people that sort of challenge me and I hadn't thought about this, whether it be internally or at all of our new partners that are chasing us to want to be on the CDI train, or certainly customers who are constantly causing me to sort of think about something in a new light. And then, I then have to kind of digest and take that back and sort of find some space, if you will, to think something through, maybe do some research, talk to all these other great colleagues that I have and say, hey, I heard about this. What do you think? And sort of essentially form an opinion and be able to give some advice. I think the interactions with people to create those sort of challenges, as well as the interactions with people and the freedom to go sort of solution around the challenges is amazing. I don't think I've had that in lots of times in my career. It's kind of become sort of the mundane. You go through the same meetings over and over and over again, the same tasks over and over again. It's hard to kind of create space to think. And I think CDI provides a good framework for that.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that for me, I learn from people. Ultimately, and I couldn't agree more with what you said. Is I'm not the type of person that'll sit there and read a 40-page manual, right? I'm just, not a big fan of that. But I am the type of person that will sit and collaborate with someone and learn from them, something that I may not know. And for me, it's about the customer, right? Is if we're collaborating, it's to solve a challenge for our customer. I keep thinking of that hospital that went down. What can we do? How can we collaborate to prevent that from happening? Right. And that's what really matters to me, is learning from people to solve problems. I'm a problem solver by nature. that's what I want to do. And having exposure to people that can facilitate those solutions is so important.
Yeah, so I'll just dovetail into that as well, right? So when you first asked the question, the first thing that came to my mind was the challenges that we get to address, right? And whether that's internal, external, with partners, the collaboration that we're doing, that's the challenging part, that's the fun part, that's the rewarding part, right? And being able to create that repeatable process, that scalable process, right? Where you're dealing with thousands of clients on a monthly basis. And, you know, we're not putting another man on the moon right now. Like, we're solving business and enterprise problems. And they're important and they matter, but it is a repeatable process that we can scale.
Love it. Any last words?
This has been fun. We're all clearly tinkerers and problem solvers.
We are tinkers and problem solvers and gamers, apparently. Programmers and gamers.
Yeah, it's funny because I haven't thought about programming in Perl in about 2 decades. And
it's really good.
It is. I loved it.
That's cool. Well, now that we've done this, so we in the CDI CTO podcast, I'll call it a project. We've been primarily focused on partnerships and hosting executives from various different strategic partners. You're going to start seeing some of these faces doing similar things with partners. Again, like I said, potentially with customers, with other team members. A lot of opportunities to sort of spread our voice and our influence.
I look forward to actually doing some interviews with some employees along the way. That'll be a lot of fun.
It would be fun, and we have other series coming out too. Like there's a essay series that's coming out with various different solution architects throughout the organization. So we're trying to keep it interesting for everybody and sort of spread the ball around and give people an opportunity to do this. It's pretty fun. We've gotten some great feedback on some of the initial episodes that we've done, and that's that. So
it's been awesome, Will. Thanks. Great job with the studio.
I mean,
listen, I'm a huge...
We have to do it behind the scenes.
Right.
Yes, we have to turn the camera
get this look
around
that way. Yeah. But I'm a big fan of content creation. And I think that the content creation culture that we're creating at CDI is something that I'm incredibly proud of. And I see this, the Office of CTO podcast videos, and I love them, right? So the more content we can create, the better it is. So this is a great opportunity for us.
We're gonna tap you to create some of that content.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
You're signing up for some work there. No, this has been fun. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.
The CDI CTO Podcast is brought to you by CDI, hosted by Will Huber and produced by Alyssa Hall and Spencer Grogan. To learn more about CDI, you can visit cdillc.com. The CDI CTO Podcast is a production of CDI Studios.